joining us for today's seminar. Firstly, I would request our director, Professor Uday Annapure, to introduce this webinar, that is Colloquy. So, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Joyita. I'm very happy to announce this series of lectures. The idea behind starting this series of lecture is to make aware the students with various aspects of science, engineering, technology, as well as social sciences. And here, by this way, we can invite or get connected with various uh, renowned scientists or the well-known people around the world, where our students can have a chance to listen to them, interact with them. So with this objective, the ICT Marathwada campus Jalna has started this series of lecture, and we are definitely privileged that Professor A.B. Pandit, our Vice Chancellor, have agreed to be a speaker for this inaugural session of this series of lectures. So, Professor Pandit will be delivering the inaugural talk today for this lecture series. So, I would request Dr. Joyita to take it over ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, sir. Before I introduce Pandit sir, I would like to inform you all that we have a 15-minute interaction session after the talk. So I request you to save your queries for that. Okay, so today we are here to listen to Professor Abhay Pandit on chemical sciences in nation building. So science and technology is associated in all means with modernity, and it is an essential tool for rapid development. Chemical research and development has its contribution in all aspects of science and technology, starting from energy engineering to health and medicine. So Professor Pandit, Honorable Vice Chancellor of Institute of Chemical Technology, Mumbai, has had a distinguished and vast career in chemical engineering, of which I will highlight few achievements. He was instrumental in starting a major activity and program in the area of hydrodynamic cavitation for intensification of physical and chemical processing applications. A unique creative approach of using fundamental knowledge coupled with simple, elegant experiments has resulted into novel cavitational reactors. Professor Pandit has authored over 500 publications and holds 30 patents. Apart from research, he has also contributed to innovation in teaching at graduate and undergraduate levels, demonstrations of experiments for elaborating the physical principles of many chemical engineering operations. He is actively involved in working with committees in the area of harnessing solar energy and with tribal population in extending the chemical engineering principles for drying of farm, forest product and water disinfection for potable water. He is president of an NGO named Land Research Institute dealing with energy and town planning sector. He is fellow of many esteemed academies like National Academy of Sciences in India, Indian National Academy of Sciences, uh, Indian National Academy of Engineering, and many more. He is also recipient of many prestigious awards like Vishwakarma Medal by INSA and Sir J.C. Bose Fellow of DST, among others. Now, without further ado, we will turn the time over to Professor Pandit. Sir?
Yeah. Am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Should I be using a headphone? Let me just check.
Yeah.
Is it better or the previous one was better?
This is okay, sir. It's better.
Yeah, okay. Right. Thank you, Professor Annapure. Thank you, Joyita, for your very generous introduction, increasing the number of publications as well as patents. I'll just correct it. I've got about 400 publications, international, and maybe about 50 national publications and about 15 patents, just for the sake of correction. Anyway, thank you very much for inviting me to give this talk. And I have been meaning to talk to Jalna students for quite some time. Didn't get an opportunity to discuss with them for one reason or other. I gave some talks, but not the talk where I could really discuss the type of chemical engineering which we do at ICT and which they are expected to do in their own campus, Jalna. So the topic which I have chosen today to discuss about is essentially how the concept of chemical sciences, in particular engineering sciences, chemical technologies, chemical engineering, can effectively be utilized for nation building. Meaning, you don't have to do what is known as a blue sky research all the time, or high-end research, or the cutting edge technology research all the time. There are many mundane and day-to-day problems which can also be tackled using the basic principles which you have learned or which you will be learning. And I'm sure the gamut of activities or the research areas which I will talk about will make you think accordingly, and will also add quite a few of the areas which I have not listed, but I'm sure with your experience and looking at the environment very critically, you will be in a position to identify these new areas. So let me see if I can start sharing the screen. Are you able to see my screen?
Yes, sir. It is.
Yeah, okay. So let me just go for a slideshow. First screen is okay?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, excellent. So as the title suggests, it's the role of chemical sciences in nation building. So let me move on, since I have already introduced you to that. Even though Jaita said that you can take the questions at the end, but if something is not clear to you, feel free to stop me or let someone else to join, cut in and ask a question, because the clarity of understanding is extremely important. So when you all joined this particular course of chemical technology 5-year integrated program, I'm sure you must have heard different types of opinions, right? What is actually chemical engineering? And you must have heard somebody telling about refineries, somebody telling you about plastics, somebody telling you about synthetic fibers such as polyester, somebody telling you about synthetic rubber, somebody telling you about the memory chips as well as the solar panels, where chemical engineering students have contributed, or chemical engineering researchers have contributed to this area in one way or other. Now, if I want to borrow the famous saying of Professor Sharma, that you wake up in the morning till you go to bed, whatever you use, whatever you handle, you would have touched or would have contributions from chemical engineering and chemical engineering or chemical sciences. And that's why I've chosen the topic of chemical sciences. We are surrounded by chemicals. We are surrounded by chemistry, a different type of chemistry happening all the time, whether it is chemistry related to environment, whether it is chemistry related to food preparation, whether it is chemistry related to making of plastic, whether it is chemistry related to catalysis, you name it, and there is a chemistry associated with it. And that is how we exploit the principles of chemistry to make products, to develop processes which will make our life relatively easier. To add on, but what is the general perception? You would have seen, the media is always focusing on negative things. So we'll always find lots of reports which are coming out that chemical engineers, chemical technologies are the ones who have polluted the air, who have destroyed the environment, and they are polluting greenhouse, they are emitting greenhouse and toxic gases. They are generating this plastic waste, microplastic waste. They are polluting our water sources. They are causing oil spills. They are causing multiple accidents. And you would have seen the reports which are appearing in the newspaper practically on a weekly basis that somewhere or other some accident has occurred. Now, these things happen not because of chemical engineers or chemical technologies. These things happen because of irresponsible use of the principles which you have learned. So there is always, see, every coin has two sides. One is a king side and another is a tail side. Now, sometimes, depending upon how you employ it and how you utilize it, it's going to be considered from that angle. It's like if you consider nuclear energy, well, it can be used for positive purposes such as generation of electricity using nuclear energy. At the same time, the same nuclear phenomena or nuclear fission phenomena can also be utilized for the creation of atomic bomb, which could be a destruction, which could be a destructor of society. So every technology, every anthropological human activity will always have two sides. And we as engineers should consciously look at both these sides and then decide which is going to be the side which we are going to follow and how we are going to follow it, so that safety and environment is given prime most important, so that the actions of ours do not destroy these environment or do not compromise on the safety aspects. You look at chemical sciences and you will find that they have contributions in everything. They have contributions in medicine because, medicine and fertilizers. If these two had no contribution from chemical technologists, then our lifespan would never have increased to 65 to 70 years, which was about 35, 37 years at the time of independence. Now, the increase in the lifespan has occurred mainly because of the development of the medicines. At the same time, if we did not have fertilizers coming out of chemical engineering or chemical technologies box, then we would have been dying of hunger as of today. Because you may not remember, all of you have been born after the period when India was not self-sufficient in food in the early 60s or mid 60s. And then the Green Revolution took place, and this Green Revolution made huge quantity of food grain. And today India has become a net exporter of food grain from being a net importer of food grain. They have also contributed to a development of many of these which have been listed on these sites, water and wastewater treatment. Because of the limitations on the availability of the water, we are going to be in a position to have to reuse the water because the water sources are limited. I'll give you some other time a talk on water as such, because only 0.3% of the water currently available on the globe is fresh water and can be utilized, 0.3%. Rest of the water is not utilizable because they either exist in ocean or they exist in the form of a combined moisture or a bound moisture. So medicines, biomaterials, you would have seen, you would not have had a dentist putting you false teeth. Again, the materials, biomaterials have a contribution coming from chemical technologies. The current daily bread or cookies, what you eat, again, you have chemical technologies. I'm sure you are well aware of this and might have started looking into it. And this semester, I'm sure you will start looking into the specialization which you choose. And this specialization will make you aware of many other opportunities which will be present in front of you by the time you graduate yourself. So chemical technologists and engineers have also contributed not only to the urban scene, it has also contributed to the rural area. Now you can see the fertilizers and pesticides, which I already talked to you about, developing of drop resistance crop. Now see, chemical engineers and technologies exploit the basic principles. They don't have their own principles as such. They use the principles of chemistry, they use the principles of biology, they use the principles of physics, they use and express it in the form of mathematics so that they are in a position to solve that mathematical equation and come out with the solution, which solution they can be employed, they can be applied, and then can be exploited for a specific facility creation or specific process creation. Food preservation, milk, India is, this is what was known as a white revolution. Then the vegetable oil revolution was called as Operation Golden Drop. So there are many such successes where chemical sciences and chemical engineers have played a key role over the years. Again, focusing our attention to rural area, the entire sugarcane industry, jaggery industry, alcohol production, compost making, drinking water purification. You will find everywhere chemical sciences and chemical engineers or chemical technologies have contributed. Now, out of all these options which are available to you, which particular option is your choice? And that's why in your syllabi and in your course, you have been given a choice to be able to do a specialization in any specific area. And we'll see how these areas can be utilized or how these areas can be exploited for study or for scientific contribution in due course. Again, biogas generation, this is essentially a combination of physics, biochemistry, and microbiology combined, put together. Now, this again will result into a device involving multiple processes, and we'll talk about some of these processes in due course of time, where the waste is being converted into a fuel, and this is essentially a renewable fuel because you're not burning anything directly, you are converting something which is combustible or which has a capability of producing methane and biodigesting it anaerobically to produce methane and carbon dioxide. The methane is being burned for exploiting the calorific value associated with methane. What is that thing which differentiates you all, that is chemical engineers and technologists, from any and all other engineers? And that is what you should remember all the time. Never forget that material energy balance calculations is the one which separates you all from all other branches of engineering. Chemical engineering technology is the only engineering branch where we start with material energy balance. And that's why you would have seen also in your syllabi that material energy balance is one of the first subjects. After stoichiometry, you start looking into material energy balance, systems where the materials are recycled, the systems where materials are separated, so on and so forth. And the way to look at things, the way to look at any process, the way to look at any activity from the point of view of input is equal to output plus storage. That's the balance. Now, this balance for any activity can be looked upon, right? If you are considering an activity where a chemical product is being made, then you will consider input of raw materials. And this input of raw materials by proper processing condition will result into products, some waste meaning it could be byproducts, and that waste can be utilized for something else. And some quantity will be stored, such as in the case of anaerobic digestion, which we just talked about. Microbial action takes place, hydrolysis happens, followed by acidogenesis happen, followed by acetogenesis happen, followed by methanogenesis, and the energy is stored in the form of methane, which has a calorific value when you combust it. So you have always an understanding of input raw materials resulting into product due to processing. Some waste. Waste means some byproducts, not the products which you were aiming to make for, and certain quantity of material which is remaining stored. Stored means remaining in that system which you are using it to carry out this chemical, physical, biological transformation. So this needs to be remembered all the time, that every system or activity which you approach, first look at it from a material balance point of view. Now, many a times these transformations are associated with the transfer of energy. Many of these reactions, are you aware, either exothermic or endothermic. So either the energy is supplied or energy needs to be extracted to maintain a specific temperature, as a result of which, followed by material balance, you need to look into energy balance. So again, you have energy input and energy output. Only the form of energy changes, because energy is the one which, mass and energy are two things that are interconvertible, but they cannot be destroyed, right? And usually we don't look into this interconversion, because mass to energy conversion happens only in the nuclear reactions. And we will consider that when we look into the nuclear energy as well. So MEBC is the heart of chemical engineering. The utility of this concept is proven in the area such as energy, water management, biological systems, even in financial engineering. And any accountant, a chartered accountant, what does he do? He looks at your earning, he looks at your spending, he looks at your tax appliances, and he looks at how much you have been able to save. So that is also a type of a balance. So learning of various techniques of carrying out various balances are the techniques which differentiates chemical engineers stroke technologists from all other engineering branches. So please remember, never forget this unique subject which you have learned, and try to get a mastery over that particular subject, and you'll encounter many of these challenging balancing situations where you either will have information, you won't have information, you need to generate information, you need to do experiments to generate this information. But never forget MEBC, material energy balance calculations, right? So you can see that multiple on the left hand side, usually you have stored energy, stored materials, energy is required, whether in the form of heat, work, chemical, electrical, processing the raw materials, and then you get multiple products. So this entire balance needs to be carried out as is explained on this particular slide. Having established and emphasized enough that MEBC is essentially heart of our profession, that is a profession of a chemical engineer and technologist, then we move on, is what is that thing again which is specific to our learning. We then learn various unit operations, and in every unit operation, you again apply material energy balance, right? So these unit operations are generalized or categories. It's like when you are reading a class of books, you will read romantic novels. Sometimes you will read travel logs. Sometimes you will read the obituaries. Sometimes you will read the life stories. So these are various categories. Similarly, the type of transformation which are undertaken by chemical engineers and technologies without a chemical reaction occurring are known as unit operations. So the unit operations which you would study is fluid transport, fluidization, filtration involving fluid flow, heat transfer, you would understand evaporation, heat exchange are the processes, unit operations involving heat transfer. Then there are mass transfer based unit operations such as gas absorption, distillation, extraction, adsorption, drying, crystallization. Then there are thermodynamically controlled processes, which are essentially called as equilibrium control processes. Gas liquefaction, that is when you start with a gas which is in the gaseous form and exceed the critical temperature pressure conditions to convert it into liquid, is like liquid oxygen, liquid nitrogen, which is currently being utilized and much talked about in this particular pandemic. Also, the refrigeration. Refrigeration is a unit operation controlled essentially by thermodynamics, mainly because that involves a phase change. Phase change also involves in evaporation, but refrigeration usually happens. Evaporation, liquid to vapor. In refrigeration, you may have liquid to solid or solid to liquid kind of an operation. And then there are mechanical processes, which is essentially transport of solid, then size reduction, crushing and pulverization, then size separation, which is sieving and screening operation. All these do not necessarily involve any chemical reactions. If these chemical reactions are happening, they are incidental. That means the target is not that, but because of either the energy supply or energy removal, the chemical reactions do occur sometimes. So similar to unit operations, you have unit processes. Now, these are the classical chemical transformations which occur: oxidation, nitrogen, esterification, hydrogenation, sulfonation, sulfatation, hydrolysis, alkylation, halogenation, polymerization. And those who enjoy chemistry can identify a few more unit processes. And I'm not talking about all of those unit processes, mainly because what we are going to looking for is a combination of all of these unit operations, unit processes for creating a process or for creating a product. So let's move our attention that material energy balance, unit operations, unit processes, how all of this can be combined and we can use it for nation building. And I've just listed out few of the possible topics where all these operations can be exploited, can be employed to achieve our final objective. Health, medicines, soil productivity. What is happening is we every year when we grow a particular crop, the soil nutrients are abstracted by the plant or a tree, and then we utilize that, and then it goes back, what is called as a circular economy, that the excreta from ours, the waste from ours then essentially goes back. And that is what the composting is all about. So a soil productivity, if not supplemented with the nutrients, is going to progressively go down. That will result into the decreasing yield of the crops or yield of any of the plantations which you are going to put in there. Once you prepare and make this particular plantation and recover the agricultural produce, these agricultural produce being biodegradable in nature needs to be stored. Otherwise, they are going to get spoiled. I'm sure those who are eating mangoes these days would understand how critically the mangoes need to be stored. If they are not stored, how easily they get spoiled. At the same time, whenever you are growing a particular crop, let's say a cereal, only a small portion of that entire crop weight is effectively utilized by us. The balance, the stock, and the biomass is essentially waste for us. We can't just eat biomass as such. But there are mammals which will be more than happy to eat that. In fact, that is their staple diet. So we can utilize this agricultural waste, which is essentially a byproduct of agricultural operation. Then, of course, all of these activities require huge quantities of water. So every source of water needs to be looked at as a potential input to this water pool, and then how this particular potential input can be utilized or can be exploited effectively, either for our own operation, that is engineering operation, or it can also be utilized possibly for our own consumption. Energy efficiencies, because since energy cannot be created, neither it can be destroyed. There are different modes in which the energy needs to be looked at. There are energies which are based on the fossil fuel. These, once you use it, you cannot recover any energy from it. And that's why the current focus from a sustainability point of view is the use of renewable energy. So this renewable energy is going to be the major focus because the way we are consuming sources of energy which have been stored over thousands and thousands of years, and we will be finishing it in no time, maybe few hundred years at the most, and beyond that we have to exploit other sources of energy which are essentially perennial. That means they do not get exhausted. And the only renewable sources of energy which do not get exhausted are solar energy is a one. And second, because of the solar energy, what are the secondary energy sources which are generated, such as wind energy, tidal energy, and the biomass energy, which is essentially growing as a result of input of solar energy again. So if you consider Earth as an enclosed system where essentially no exchange of mass takes place, usually it doesn't, barring few satellites or few of the space vehicles which have gone to the Mars and come back to the Earth. The system otherwise is adiabatic in nature. It is insulated completely. So whatever is going to happen has to happen on the surface of this particular Earth, and that is why balance of this particular energy, balance of the material is the one which you really need to undertake and really need to look at it. And the last topic is waste management. I mean, effectively, you can live in a filthy surroundings as well, but that is not necessarily going to help you. So creating a strategy, well, of waste management using engineering principles also, because if you are saying that we are the creators of mess, we are the polluters, then it is our job also to find out solutions to those problems, right? So as listed out in this blue square, we say many social, rural, national issues can find quantitative and timely solutions if they are approached using chemical engineering principles, right? Smart city, clean Ganga project, these are just few examples. But if you look at, if you approach every problem with a material energy balance point of view, I'm sure you will come out with a solution which is unique, which is exciting, and which is sustainable. So I'm going to talk about now, after this lot of introduction, I thought it was necessary. Even if we are able to curtail this particular talk, I don't mind interacting with you again, and maybe a few weeks down the line, I'll engage you again, and whatever is left of today, we can discuss about it in due course later on as well. So I have chosen certain specific case studies for you to understand and for you to look at, just to show it to you that when we carry out research or when we carry out study, it doesn't have to be an earth-shattering discovery all the time. It doesn't have to be something which will be looked at by the globe to start with. What we try to do is we look at the local problem and you try to find out a global solution to that. That means the solution which is based on the sound principles of engineering involving physics, chemistry, mathematics, physics, chemistry, biology, expressed in the form of mathematical model. Solutions coming out of that are the solutions which are going to be applicable across the globe. They are not solutions limited to the local problem. This problem and the solution which is coming out of that has a global applications. And that is why I use this particular phrase, look at a local problem and find a global solution to that. So the three items which I have talked about are solid fuel burning stoves, cooking devices, and solar dryer. They are all related with energy, as an cavitating hand pump related to water, then efficient green processes for industrial water treatment, again water, then agro waste utilization, some properties which can be exploited, which can be utilized for converting waste into assets, again using chemical engineering principle, chemical technology technologies. Cardinal production from cashew nut shell, these are all agro waste utilization. Then growth promoters, because what is going to happen is with land mass being limited and sea being vast, in future, we will be using sea for cultivation. As a result of which, whatever agricultural growth or whatever biological or a biomass growth which occurs in sea, it is also necessary for you to look at sea as a possible field in which things can grow, things can be harvested from. I mean, we do harvest fish and other sea creatures for our food, but I think we have to go beyond that, and we have to think in terms of making other food products also being grown in sea. And I'm sure Professor Annapure will list out. So there are aquaculture, there are aqua farming, there are prawns farming, and all these things have already started happening, right? So rather than having a product coming out of agricultural activity, the products are now also started coming out of activities or anthropological activities coming out of sea farming. Then we have selective one-step extraction of intracellular biomolecules. This is a slightly advanced topic, but I'll talk about it when it comes. At the same time, when you are looking at things critically, you come up with many problems which you have not thought of. I mean, I don't like anybody coming, and you students have extremely creative thinkers. You have got an extremely large exposure to the world in terms of net surfing and availability of information. And it should not be difficult for you to come up with the possible problems or possible areas where you need to work on. Now, so I don't like that when somebody comes, say, I've got a project to do, what should I do? It does take time for you to look into it, see and start corresponding, start correlating what you have learned. And then you will come out and then you start using the principles which you have already learned. So portable microscope is the one which, if we get time, I will talk about it as well. Then we have a life cycle analysis. What is it? Every anthropological activity which we undertake, this anthropological activity is affecting the environment. Is essentially, you must have learned in thermodynamics that entropy is increasing all the time, and at some point of time it will stop increasing, and that will be end of the world. And there are processes which are irreversible in nature. Every irreversible process has a thermodynamic limit, and exergy destruction takes place. Exergy is the utility, is the useful part of the energy, and that destruction, that means many a times you are destroying the exergy, not the energy. Energy is conserved, the form is changing, but the useful part of the energy is being destroyed. And if you do not extract 100% utilization of that energy, every time you use a process less efficiently, you will find that this process is not going to be sustainable in nature. Now, this can be looked at by following again the principles of balance, and this is what is called as life cycle analysis. We also call it as a cradle to grave approach. That means when a product is made using the raw materials which are required to make that particular product, after the product has been utilized, after the product is being thrown, what happens to this particular product? Are we able to recycle that product completely? And that is what is called as a circular economy. And that's the only way we can sustain ourselves. And I will just list out few of the challenges which you can look at from rural areas and try to solve those or find global solutions which I mentioned to you about. So let's move our attention to solid fuel burning stove. Now, why solid fuel burning stove? A majority of you people must be using gas, but I'm sure those who are coming from rural background or have got some connections in the rural part, they would have seen these photographs quite readily. Now, why it is necessary for us to look at? It's extremely important because of our large population of our country. India holds almost 16% of the world population, and the land mass which it owns is less than 5%, less than 3%. That 3% of the land mass is occupied by 16% of the world population, as a result of which every living thing requires a food to eat, and especially the human beings, which involve cooking of food, we require large quantity of food. Imagine 16% of the land, 16% of the population of the world, totaling to about 130 crores of 120 crores of people, requiring 2 square meals a day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and that meal is to be cooked, because we don't eat raw meal all the time. Sometimes we do, but most of the time it needs to be cooked. And the cooking practices are so inefficient. India's, out of the total energy consumption basket, India consumes anywhere between 28 to 40% energy only for cooking of our food. The same number in the developed country rarely exceeds 2% or 3%. That means 97% or 98% of the energy is utilized for other purposes. Other purposes such as space heating, for industrial production, for maybe for producing materials. Whereas in India, 28 to 40% of the energy is utilized only for cooking purposes, right? So it is our problem that we are the people who are using such large quantity of energy. So nobody is going to find solutions for us. We have to find our solutions, problems to our own solutions to our own problems. Nobody is going to find solutions to those problems because it is not their problem, it is our problem. And when we are using this 40% of the total energy and we are using it extremely inefficiently, out of which only 14% of the energy is commercial fuel. That means gas, kerosene, or what we call as hydrocarbon fuel. Balance 86% are essentially renewable energy, right? Which includes wood, renewable, biomass, renewable, cow dung, renewable, which is in a way good. But unfortunately, what happens is the usage of these non-commercial energy sources is inefficient, as a result of which a lot of hard work is involved, as you see from here. Now, this is only for collection of firewood. And on an average, the Indian woman, while collecting a firewood, spends 2 days a week just for collecting the fuel. 2 days, right? And in 2 days of collection, she is able to cook meal for the 7 days. Now imagine if we are able to develop a cooker or a stove, not cooker, a stove, which has 50% higher efficiency, then that Indian woman will have 1 day left to do something else which is useful and productive for the nation. You can imagine the mass. Imagine 50% of the people, 50% are women, and 50% of that you have 1 day out of 7 days saved, and they don't have to have a collection of fuel. So you can imagine 120 crores, 60 crores, 60 crores into 24 hours, or even if they are spending, let's say 8 hours, consider 8 hours, 60 into 8, 480 crore man hours are available to carry out some other work. Can you imagine the kind of productivity or output which can come out of, which can contribute to the national growth or in terms of GDP? As a result of which, this is extremely important. But it's not only that. Because the system uses fuel very inefficiently, these are the kind of devices which are currently used. And you look at the figures which are in the bracket written below. Those figures indicate the thermal efficiency. That means out of the total energy content of this particular fuel, only about 8 to 12% in the case of three stone fire, 10 to 20% in the case of Bhagya Lakshmi, 10 to 20% in case of Astra, is actually utilized for the purpose for which it needs to be utilized. For that is the cooking of the food, right? And this is extremely inefficient, very, very inefficient. And you see maximum you are able to reach something like 25% or so. At the same time, on an average, if you consider a standard gas which is being utilized in your kitchen, on an average, the efficiency is 50%. That means 50% more improvement is possible, or 100% more improvement is possible if the principles which you can learn from a gas stove can be adopted, can be implemented for a solid fuel burning stove. As I said to you, the loss in efficiency is not the only problem. Okay, fuel is being lost, doesn't matter. But the kind of emissions which it results into because of inefficient combustion results into respiratory diseases, lung problems, increase in the chances of contracting tuberculosis, eye infections. Now, the medical expenses for this part is at least 6 times more than the cost of the fuel. So if you are in a position to come up with a solution, a global solution, which allows you to utilize a smokeless chula, a highly efficient chula, which produces and utilizes, let's say, with 60% or 70% thermal efficiency, effectively you have killed 2 birds in 1 stone. You have reduced the usage, which is usage of time for the collection of the wood or collection of solid fuel, and you have also reduced its possible impact on your health. So that your health bill also goes down, and you have plenty of time on your hand to do something else. This is exactly, and what will you do? You will do exactly the same thing. You will carry out material energy balance. Imagine this is a solid fuel burning stove on the left-hand corner, which is in the pelletized form, and you know the process of combustion. First, it happens is devolatilization, followed by pyrolysis, or drying, devolatilization, then burning of these particular volatiles which are coming out of it, and finally combustion of the solid char which is there. Now, if you understand the material balance, if you understand the energy balance of this, how and what chemical reactions are taking place, and you manipulate and devise and design a device which produces a clean flame, which delivers energy in the maximum possible way, extracting the total calorific value of the fuel, and you are left with only ash, which is essentially inorganic oxides, which has a fertilizer value, which acts as a nutrients, and these nutrients then can be recycled back to the soil to improve the productivity or to improve the soil fertility. Then you have found a solution. You have found a solution which is a global solution, because what you're going to learn from the combustion of a solid fuel, principles are same, right? You take a wood, you take a piece of wood and you try to light it, you'll find that the wood will not lit till it gets dried. And you would have seen during the holy this thing, initially it smokes. That smoke is nothing but water vapor which is coming out. Then you start smelling it, the volatiles have coming out. Then you need to light it, these volatiles will combust, these volatiles will come out, they will combust, they will release that particular energy, and then finally slow burning of the char which takes place, the coal which gets formed is burning takes place, and next day morning you'll find a white ash which is remaining with few particles of wood which are partially burned, having some part of unburned matter either in the form of wood or in the form of coal present out there. So this is a stove which was developed in ICT by using again all the basic principles which I told you about of material and energy balance, understanding what is the quantum of energy which is utilized. You see the quality of the flame, blue flame, very similar to the flame as if that flame is coming out of gas. This flame is coming out of volatiles which are coming out from the biomass briquettes or biomass noodles, which you see on the extreme left-hand corner. And the stove which is developed is called as an Urja stove or Eco Chula. And you can see the Eco Chula design of it. And you have a bed which is moving up and down depending upon whether you light it from the top or you light it from the bottom. There are specific recommendations, and this will result into a very efficient combustion. And the efficiency of this has been measured in the form of about 58 to 60%. That means you have already saved half of the fuel otherwise you would have used if you had followed any of the traditional stoves. At the same time, when we were making this chula, you see the multiple this thing which is happening out there. Let's see if I can indicate it. You see the upper right hand figure. Now this upper right hand figure has got holes out here and a ceramic cylinder. Now this cylinder, see, the situation is heat is generated as a result of combustion. The secondary air, if it is heated using this particular air, because your pot is here on top, right? Pot is here on top. Now, if this air is heated, then you are effectively utilizing this particular heat, and the hot air then comes out through the upper holes from the top, and it lights the volatiles which are coming from this biomass, and these volatiles burn, giving you a blue flame. Now, usually when we made this particular stove, because of the extreme temperatures, which typically are in the range of about 700 to 800 degrees centigrade, metal parts were getting destroyed in no time. In fact, they were getting corroded because of the gases which are coming out as a result of the combustion activity. So we had to develop two different types of ceramic materials which had a capability of withstanding 2000 degrees centigrade temperature, at least 1500 degrees centigrade temperatures. But it required two basic specific, let's say, properties. The inner part, the red part, which you see on the extreme left-hand corner, you see a red line, straight line, is a material which is a conducting ceramics, and the blue part, which is on the side with a material which you see, it has to be an insulating one, because you can't be touching it from outside, and that's not safe, as a result of which we had to come up with two concentric cylinders, inner cylinder being conducting, outer cylinder being insulating. And there are plenty of these are available. At the same time, every time you have to keep in mind that whatever activities which you do, these activity need to be judged and compared against an economics of choice. That is, you can't choose something which is going to cost you a bomb, as a result of which I'll be able to make a very efficient stove. But that if that stove is available for a lakh of rupees, nobody's going to buy that. So I have to look at the affordability of my invention, affordability of my discovery, and then only implement it. And that's the reason why during all of this, you will also understand how financial engineering and financial balancing also needs to be taken into account while you are coming up and developing an interesting or innovative activity. Now here you see the different types of composition, the costs which are involved in that. Our objective was essentially to come up with a stove which is not going to cost us more than, let's say, 1,000 rupees. And finally, we did succeed. And in fact, 2 or 3 patents have come out of this, of development of new materials. If you remember the biomaterials which we talked about, similarly, these are conducting ceramics and insulating ceramics just by little changes in the compositions. And again, in these materials, we have used a waste product of thermal power industry, which is essentially a fly ash. Fly ash contains cenospheres, which are essentially ceramic spheres, which are hollow balls with air, and air is the best insulator which you can have. And you take a proper combination of cenospheres and silicon carbide, which is a conducting material, and you can tune the thermal properties of this particular ceramic, coupled with essentially a ceramic, what is called as ceramic material, a clay. So a combination of clay white, silicon carbide, and fused silica, these are the ones, and Senospheres. These are the cost, and just by tweaking and changing the composition, you are able to tune the thermal properties of these materials. Once you have developed this, I don't know what happened. You have to put, you just can't burn stove. You require a stove. Coupled with that, you require vessels. Now these vessels need to be put on stove, and they will be able to abstract the energy which is released by the stove as a result of combustion of that particular fuel. So we developed what we call as eco cooker. Now here again, all the 4 chemical engineering principles have been utilized. Now if you have a small flame and a very large vessel, then you will find that by the time the hot part of the vessel where the flame exists is able to transfer that heat will get dissipated to the surroundings. It will be like Birbal's khichdi. So there is an optimum, if at the same time, if you use too small a flame and too small a vessel and a very large flame, large amount of energy which is released by the flame is going to go wasted. Right? Now see this particular material. Let's see what is. Okay. Anyway, this particular material, essentially the heat is going to get wasted. So there is an optimum size of vessel to flame ratio which we arrived at. And when we arrived at that particular ratio, we could transfer maximum amount of heat. Okay. Second part is when the material is getting cooked, the material is getting cooked because of the enthalpy which is stored in the medium. Now, most of the time the medium is water. Water has a very high specific heat, 1 kilocalories per kg per degree centigrade. As a result of which, if you are able to heat water, let's say you are cooking rice, you are able to heat water and bring it to a minimum cooking temperature and maintain that temperature, you don't need to supply any additional heat, which is equivalent to early shut off of the heat supply. That means you can switch off the gas if you are going to use it, or you can remove the vessel from the stove and put another vessel to utilize it. Third is insulated. Once you have heated it up, and if it remains at a temperature above the cooking temperature, then you don't need to supply any heat, and whatever sensible heat which is stored in that water is capable of cooking the rice, or for that matter, any material. After you know that what are the typical minimum cooking temperatures which are required. So third principle is reduction in heat loss to the surroundings, early shut off, reduction in the heat loss to the surroundings. And fourth, I can see a hand from Charlie. Let me just finish this and then I'll come to that. The fourth is the study, is the part which I already studied in heat transfer, a multiple effect evaporator. Once you generate steam, that steam can be utilized multiple times. So in the multiple effect evaporator, you use steam only once, then that generates steams while condensing. Then the steam which is generated in the second effect is transferred to a third effect, which generates steam in the third effect while the second effect steam is condensing. As a result of which, once you have supplied the heat to generate steam, the same steam can be utilized multiple times, and depending upon the efficiency of multiple effect evaporator, which usually is 80%, 90%. If you have a triple effect evaporator, then you will be able to evaporate approximately 2.5, 2.6 kgs of water per kg of steam, or per kg of steam generation, right? So when you combine all these principles in one go, every adaptation of this principle saves 30% of the fuel, and ultimately you end up saving almost 70% of the fuel, right? This has happened in the lab, but in the field also we have been able to save as high as 60-65% of fuel otherwise you would have spent. So Saili, you can unmute yourself and ask a question if you have. I can see your hand. Saili Deshmane. No?
Sir, it is by mistake, sir.
Okay, fine, fair enough. Thank you. Let's move on. So you have now a stove followed by a companion cooker. And since you are sometimes cooking meals for a very, very large number of people, such as in temples or in schools or in colleges, we also developed a continuous cooker. Now, here on the left-hand side, you put the rice or dal or lentils or whatever you want to put it. There's a screw which pushes it into this particular chamber. Hot water is introduced from here at a controlled rate, and the material then moves along and the cooked material comes out at the end. Now, depending upon the time which is required, you have to study everything. When the rice is getting cooked means what? How the starch is gelatinization is taking place. How much energy is going to be required, what temperature, at what duration it needs to be maintained. Because the process of cooking is a chemical reaction, and you can write the rate constant of these reactions. You can calculate what are the starting materials, what are the products which are going to be going to get formed. So all these information as a food technologist you will study, and then you are using chemical engineers and in principles to come up with the device. So we have used this in schools, we have used it in Aurangabad, we have used it in Vadodara. In fact, the plant is located in Aurangabad of making these particular devices, stove as well as a cooker as well as a continuous cooker. At the same time, you can look at the costing of it, and you find that whatever money which you spend on this, the money which you spend can be recovered in a less than a year's time. 6 to 8 months are sufficient only in terms of fuel and labor saving, especially for a place where you are spending huge amount of money for cooking of meals, right? Solar dryers, again, as I said, I'm going to talk about energy part of it. So you have solar dryers. Principles are very similar, are very simple. Essentially, you have inclined part. So what happens is if you have a surface which is blackened, it will absorb solar radiation. The air in contact with the hot surface will rise in its temperature. Its density will increase. Now, this increase in the density will make the hot air rise, but since there is a partition out here, it will start going in this direction. The material to be dried is kept in the upper part. The hot air moves over this material to be dried, and it comes out with the laden moisture. Again, you can write material balance, you can write energy balance, you can write pressure balance, which is essentially the density difference which is responsible for driving of this particular hot air. You can write this, and this is a simple device, can be made anywhere, and you can see the material before drying and after drying. And because it is not exposed to solar radiation, solar UV radiations, you don't see any change in the color. Now this can be just crushed, and you can use it in any of your food items. Coriander can be stored. Because there is no moisture associated with it, it reduces or sometimes completely eliminates the what is called as microbial activity. So the spoilage also gets significantly reduced. Let's move on. You can again use solar energy for multiple of activities. It's an inexhaustible source of energy. Here we generate steam, and using this particular steam, we use a vapor absorption based refrigeration cycle. So you have a parabolic stuff corrector. Now this was on top of ICT, currently is dismantled, and probably we will be putting up one more, as was decided just a couple of weeks ago. All these devices were at ICT. Currently, some repair work is going on, and the equipments have been shifted somewhere else. But you can see the photographs, the work which has all been published. You can look at it. So here again, collection of solar energy, concentration of solar energy, allowing the steam to be generated. When the concentration is reasonably high, you are in a position to generate steam at relatively higher pressures. Use that particular steam in vapor absorption refrigeration cycle, right? I don't want to spend time on that, but those who are interested in energy can look at vapor absorption refrigeration machines. What are the basic principles? They are again thermodynamically controlled systems, and they can utilize the steam generated by solar energy to carry out refrigeration. So on one hand, you can use steam to heat and cook the material. On second hand, you can use the same steam to provide the required refrigeration. So all these possibilities exist, provided you are in a position to understand what and where you want to get to. So let me spend 10 minutes more, and then I will stop, because there are many of this. I can continue to talk about it. And as I said, I promised Professor Annapure that I will start from where I stop today, and then we can continue, and I'll talk about a few other applications as well. So the second application which I wanted to talk about was disinfection of potable water using hydrodynamic cavitation. Now, what is cavitation? Cavitation is essentially a principle where you generate a spontaneous vapor at room temperature by reduction in the pressure. Now, you all know that there is a relationship between the boiling point and the pressure. Boiling point of water is 100 degrees centigrade at atmospheric pressure. If I'm able to reduce the pressure, then the water may start boiling at 90 or 80 or 70. So I reduce the pressure to such a level, the water starts boiling at room temperature. When I say boiling, means the phase conversion takes place. Water from liquid state gets converted into vapor state, right? So this is possible if you are able to reduce the pressure existing over water. Now, how can you reduce the pressure over water? You use Bernoulli's principle. Now, Bernoulli's principle tells me, because the total energy of kinetic energy and potential energy is conserved, kinetic energy and pressure energy have again a reverse relationship. That is, if I increase the velocity, kinetic energy, pressure must go down, or if I increase the pressure, velocity will have to be much lower. So if you have water having a certain pressure and you push this particular water at higher and higher velocities, the local pressure, because of the increase in the velocity due to Bernoulli's equation, or essentially due to the force balance, you will get a reduction in the pressure. And if the pressure reduces and becomes equal to the vapor pressure of water, then the water will start spontaneously boiling. Vapor bubbles will get generated. Now, this is the reason why we wanted to do that. And we will come back to that in a minute. So if these vapor bubbles which are generated, they are vapor, right? So you know the latent heat of vaporization. So that quantum of energy is stored in those particular vapor bubbles. So if these vapor bubbles suddenly condense, right, suddenly disappear, suddenly collapse, all the enthalpy, which is the latent heat of vaporization, will be released spontaneously. So if there are microbes which are present in the vicinity of these collapsing vapor bubble, these microbes will be exposed to significant amount of energy, and there is a possibility that these microbes will be destroyed, will be killed, will be rendered unviable because they will get disrupted. It's like beating them with a hammer, a small hammer, a micro hammer, and it is capable of destroying these particular microbes. Now, if the microbes can be destroyed, then essentially the pathogens, which are the disease-causing microbes which are there, they can also be killed. And if they can be killed, water essentially is now disinfected and fit for drinking purposes. All right, so let's move on. So we have used this particular device by developing a hand pump and modifying this particular hand pump. This hand pump was developed way back in 1952 by a bicycle shop repairer. Right? He did not know any engineering. He did not know any Bernoulli's equation. He did not know any fluid flow. But he thought that there is a combination of two non-returning valves which can be utilized for pumping of borewell water. And that was termed as India Mark I hand pump. And then subsequently UNICEF came up and standardized that. And that is what is today utilized as India Mark II hand pump. Now, India Mark II hand pump was chosen because it is ubiquitous. It is located everywhere in the rural area. And the principle of cavitation, which I just told you about, is indicated out here. So you start with a small vapor nuclei, it grows to a maximum size, and it collapses and releases all the energy. Now, if the microbes happens to be in the vicinity of such a collapsing cavity, they get destroyed. Because of the adiabatic nature of the collapse, you reach temperatures of the order of 10,000 Kelvin and pressures of the order of 5,000 to 10,000 atmospheres. What it means is you are generating conditions which are severe than the surface of the sun. Surface of the sun has a temperature of approximately 7,000 Kelvin, and pressures, of course, we don't know. But here we have 10,000 Kelvin and pressures 5,000 to 10,000 atmosphere. That means the conditions very similar, at least in the form of a temperature, equal to the surface of the sun are generated for a very, very short duration in the cavitating hand pump. Now, the duration is typically microsecond. Now, it is fine. Microsecond duration is good, but it is also associated with what is called as a shock wave. Now, shock wave creates a liquid microjet reaching velocities in the range of 200 to 300 meters per second. It's like a jet cutting. So if the microbe is there, microbe will just get split because of this jet cutting action generated as a result of asymmetric collapse of the cavity. So symmetric collapse generates temperatures and pressures. Asymmetric collapse generates liquid jets, high velocity liquid jets. But all this results into a combination of a cavitating hand pump. Let me see. So these are the components which we studied. Now this is schematically indicating how the hand pump works. Now you have a handle which lifts the pump, and you see that upper part is, so there are these two non-return valves, one non-return valve at the bottom, another non-return valve at the top. And they keep on opening, shutting, and there is a plug of water which keeps on traveling up, and then eventually it comes out through the spout. If I can make this particular device, the non-return valve, in such a way that it is possible for you to make that valve cavitating, then I would be exposing these microbes during their passage twice to cavitating conditions. If I'm able to do that, then while pumping itself, I will get disinfected water. So on one hand, I'm using human energy to pump water. At the same time, part of that human energy, which is utilized for pumping of water, is converted into cavitation energy, and this cavitation energy is responsible for the destruction of the microbes. So this this we constructed it in ICT. You can see ICT in the background. We put it up on the second, third floor of a hostel. And this is the contaminated water. This is the way hand pump is pumping, and the hand pump is capable of taking up water. So we carried out this particular study in ICT just to validate the concept. So POC, proof of concept, was validated by conducting proper studies out here. And then we actually put it in the field. So here, my students are there along with few of the villagers where they put this particular pump after changing the non-return valves at the pump. See the quality of water which is coming initially, then the quality of water which started coming out. And they have been using it at least for the past now 2.5, 3 years. And there is significant reduction in the cases of diarrhea when you drink water coming out of this particular pump. These are quantitative measurements. That's 8 different locations we carried out. And we also got it tested from a government certified lab. And you can see the maximum reduction which we have got, 84% reduction in the microbial count. That means 3 log reduction had taken place from the microbes. And you can see before treatment how many microbes are present. Each of these are colony forming microbes. And after treatment, you can see a significant reduction which is taking place. This is carried out after dilution. All right, so I'm going to stop here because I can continue and keep on discussing. And I will stop here and then leave 10-15 minutes for you to have any questions on the parts which I have talked about. And the other parts, we will have a second part of this particular lecture. Is that okay, Professor Annapure?
I think Annapure sir is not there. I think he has lost the connection or something. It is.
Okay. It's okay. He's there. So Uday, what I thought that I will stop here because I have many things to talk, and then we will take it as a second part of this particular lecture at some point of time, maybe after 3-4 weeks or so. You are muted, Uday. Uday, you are muted. Yeah.
Now I could unmute. I could not be able to unmute myself. That was the problem.
That's okay, fine. Because the control was with me, probably.
Yeah. So it's okay, sir. Surely we can continue in the next lecture. And lot many things have to be listened from you. And definitely students are very interested to listen to all these innovations done by ICT. So definitely they would like to listen to you next time. So due to the paucity of time, definitely we cannot cover each and everything.
No, that's okay, but we will. But I think I have got some questions or some chats out here.
Yes.
So people are preparing chula with zero investment by simply soil. Why they will invest around 700 to 1,000 rupees? Yes, zero investment with soil, but you will be burning these in a very inefficient way. So the quantum of fuel which you require will be at least 2 to 3 times what you will use otherwise. One. Second, a lot of pollution gets created, and that pollution is responsible for respiratory diseases. So there are people who live, who are willing to stay in the filth, who are willing to stay and continue to stay like that. But there are people who are willing to pay something. But I must see what is the affordability of that. That's the reason why I said we must see what is affordable. And if I put up develop a chula and say this is available for 10,000 rupees, I'm sure nobody is going to buy that. They are going to check the cost versus benefit comparison all the time. So I think there was some apart from investment, fuel efficiency, and related health are also needed. Of course, they need to be addressed. So if you have any questions, queries, I'll be more than happy to answer. Please feel free. We've got another 10 minutes before we can call it a day. You don't have to put a chat, but you can unmute yourself and then
they can ask the questions.
They can ask the question.
Excuse me, sir, I have a question.
Please go ahead.
Yeah. Sir, this water infection, the cavitation, is it also working on the total dissolved solid? Because the color, the muddiness of the water, that was completely changed. So,
no, it doesn't work on the TDS, but sometimes what happens is, see, you know how water is, let's say, a hard water is made soft?
Yes, sir.
How it is made soft?
You know, in a ion exchange principle.
No, yeah. Forget about ion exchange. In the villages.
No, sir, sorry.
You just boil it. Bring it to boil. And okay, that is the reason sometimes you see a thick scale of calcium carbonate on the vessels.
Right. Flocculation and precipitation.
Yeah. So now it is boiling, correct? So when something gets boiled, what happens to the solubility of the salts? They cannot remain in the dissolved state, no, because it's now water is in the vapor state.
Yes.
So the dissolved salt will precipitate out.
Right, sir.
Correct? So this precipitated salt, if it is not allowed to dissolve again and you collect water before that, you would have removed TDS.
Right. Okay. So this is happening. Okay.
Correct? So you won't be able to get rid of TDS completely, but some reduction definitely takes place.
Not only some, it was too much. The color was clear actually.
No, that is different. That color is usually when you start the pump, you always get muddy water, but over a period that things settles.
Okay. Thank you, sir.
Welcome.
Any students would like to?
Students are quiet. Come on. Are you awake or let me see you all. Each one, those who has bandwidth can start their videos. Let me see how many. I can see 94 out here.
Yeah.
The count is 94. Let me see your faces if it is possible.
Hello, sir.
Good. Yeah.
Sir, I had a small doubt. Like,
go on.
The pump is removing the microorganisms or whatever the wastes.
They are not removing the microorganisms. The
it's collecting inside.
It's killing microorganisms. It is making it unviable. And it's like bringing the water to boil. Boiling also disinfects water.
Yes, sir.
The same way. But it is not actually boiling, but what you call it as a room temperature boiling or a low temperature boiling.
So does the pump require cleaning also? Like the salts must be getting accumulated there?
No. There's no cleaning. Periodically once in 2 or 3 years, you really need to just take the whole assembly out, clean it up. Sometimes it rusts. And that is why we have now converted that in the form of a stainless steel. But usually these non-return valves are made of brass. So nothing happens to those pump parts.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
Yeah.
So how sustainable has this technology been?
What do you mean sustainable?
So like how much, like you said that the parts would get rusted. So we need to replace it in 2 years, or are we
No. The part needs to be replaced probably after 7, 8 years, 10 years or so.
Okay.
So it's very sustainable. And the cost of the part, this hand pump cost to the best of my knowledge about 5,000 rupees. And another 5,000 rupees are required for you to dig the bore and then put these pipes. Nothing happens with the pipes. So, and the pump, the modified pump, instead of 5,000 rupees, it costs about 6,000 rupees. So, but in 6,000 rupees, you are getting water which is practically disinfected all the time whenever you're using it. So, one of the locations where we put this, initially the Sarpanch was very reluctant to put that pump in their village. But somehow we could convince him and we managed it. Initially, the plan was to put there for 1 week, then observe it, collect the samples, and then take it out. And after 1 week, the Sarpanch says, no, let it be there for another week. Now, another week. This went on for almost 5 or 6 weeks. So I finally asked him, what is your problem? Initially, you are reluctant to put this pump. You are not allowing us to put this pump. And now you don't want us to take the pump out so that we can put your old pump back. So I said, no, sir, what has happened is we are using this particular pump only for drinking water. In the past 4 weeks, we haven't had a single case of diarrhea or dysentery. So I didn't have to do anything. That was a valid confirmation that the water which they're drinking was indeed disinfected water. Then we brought those particular samples and then we started looking at the microbiology in ICT. And we realized that there is something which works in our favor. And what is that? That the microbes which are causing the disease, the pathogenic microbes, have a much weaker cell wall. So they get disrupted very easily. So imagine you have a set of microbes and you create conditions which are extreme conditions. Then the microbes which are weak will die first. And the microbes which have got a higher strength or higher cell wall will not necessarily die. Fortunately, the pathogenic microbes, because they have a weaker cell wall, die first. So which works in our favor. As a result of which we could explain why the villagers were not getting diarrhea or dysentery. Because even with small exposure to cavitating conditions, the first thing which was dying was pathogenic microbes.
So, can this technology be used in those man-made wells which are getting polluted day by day? So, utilizing them for drinking water purposes and disinfected water.
Yeah, see, but this part takes care of only the microbial contamination, right? We don't know what other pollutants are present in it. So microbial contamination part can be taken up and can be taken care of. But what you really need to look at is what are the other contaminants which are present in it. And then you can target those particular contaminants to be removed or to be destroyed. So one solution cannot be an answer to all the pollutants. That doesn't happen. So you need to first characterize the pollutant, what type of pollutant it is, how it can be removed, how it got there in the first place. Then only we are in a position to decide that.
We have one question from Ms. Khanam. She has
Yeah.
posted it on the chat.
On the chat, let me see chat. Yeah. How much enzymatic inactivation can be expected from hydrodynamic cavitation compared to other novel techniques in case of fruit juice processing? Is it more efficient? That's a very interesting question. In fact, one of my master student is currently working on it. And essentially comparing how effective is hydrodynamic cavitation as against thermal treatment, or what is the combination of thermal treatment and hydrodynamic cavitation, which will give you a complete deactivation of the enzyme. Enzymes do cause the spoilage of the fruit juice. So we are currently working on it, and one of the current master students, who happens to be from Jalna, in fact, has already registered for this particular topic and is continuing this work. And there are different enzymes where it will be beneficial, not necessarily all the enzymes. It depends upon the thermal stability of these particular enzymes, how thermally stable they are. that will decide. So I cannot give you a generalized answer. Maybe next year, by the time she finishes, Sujata Ambore is her name. By the time she finishes something, I'll maybe in a position to give you a better quantification. Is that okay? Does it satisfy your question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. The urban areas, this technology can be used in tap water. Indeed, it can be. In fact, there is a patented device which has been made in ICT where you require about 30 feet of water head, where a combination of a small Venturi-based hydrodynamic cavitator coupled with ultrasonic treatment can be, you don't have to use ultrasonic cavitation, coupled with that is capable of using it. You can fit it into your tap water and you can get disinfected water. It doesn't give you, see, cavitation is a stochastic phenomenon. So it's a chance happening. Cavity collapses, and if the microbe happens to be somewhere else located, that is not going to experience the destruction. It happens to be in the near vicinity. So when the concentration of microbes is high, cavitation is more effective. But as the concentration of dead microbes increase, more dead microbes get broken up rather than killing live microbes. So the efficiency of cavitating device goes on reducing if the concentration of microbes goes down. So if you have a highly polluted water, then the chances of cavitation causing a significant destruction is much better. And that is how it works. So system can be utilized, system has been developed, but there are other, what you call it as a water disinfectant suppliers, AquaGuard and others. They are marketing wise much stronger than ours device. So we don't want to get into that, but proof of concept has been made and system has also been patented in ICT. You also said is it useful to remove heavy metal ions like lead, mercury, which are present? Not all of the water supplies contains heavy metals. And in fact, some of the heavy metals are actually micronutrients. So sometimes that is why I see initially when they started using water and they started using RO was removing all the useful micronutrients. Then they realized that this is not good. The water also requires micronutrients in the form of metals for the human body, for the functioning or efficient functioning of the human body. So then they started using mineralized water, mineralized RO. So similarly, it's not that all the heavy metals are bad. Some small concentrations are required because they usually get filtered in your kidneys, and the load comes on kidney, and that may result into essentially diseases associated with the kidney. Excess heavy metal is of course not recommended, but for that precipitation out or precipitating out or an exchange are the only techniques which are currently being used. Okay, I think 6:30 we have a UAA function. So those who have time should also join that. We have